Judge Marcus Halden had dedicated his entire life to the cause of justice. In his 37 years on the bench, his deep commitment to fairness had taken him down every path a man of the law could traverse. Yet nothing in his distinguished career could have prepared him for the revelation of a far-reaching conspiracy festering beneath the veneer of a system meant to serve the people. It was during one particularly troubling case, a tedious dispute involving insider trading and questionable financial dealings, that he began to suspect that the corruption ran deeper than he had ever imagined. The city, with its skyline of glistening glass towers and dark alleyways, was a place where power and money intertwined with the destiny of the lives of its citizens. And hidden under this beautiful yet deceptive exterior was a world where injustice thrived, nurtured by the very authorities appointed to eradicate it. With every questionable ruling and every whispered rumor of payoffs to politicians and law enforcement, Marcus became increasingly convinced that something was terribly amiss. The seed of rebellion had been planted during one fateful night in his chambers. As dusk fell and the orange glow filtered through the tall windows of his office, Marcus sat alone, reviewing case files that seemed to speak of an underworld he refused to acknowledge. Hidden in the fine print were allusions to illicit meetings, coded communications, and unexplained transfers that suggested each case was not merely a dispute but a piece of a larger puzzle. A puzzle composed by a cabal whose influence could reach every corner of the justice system. That very night, agonizing over his inability to right the wrongs, Marcus felt imprisoned by his own position. His oath to the law demanded impartiality, yet his heart screamed for action to break the chains of corruption. In the sanctity of that night, he decided that drastic action was necessary, a measure that would screech the truth into the conscience of a society that had long been fooled by appearances. Closing his eyes, he vowed to reveal the rot within the system no matter what personal cost it might entail. It did not take long for Marcus to turn his daring idea into a reality. His transformation from an uncompromising judge to an undercover agent inside the system was both calculated and perilous. He began by researching the criminals he believed were masterminding the corruption, the schemers who repeatedly wielded political power like weapons, twisting the law in their favor, and silencing dissent with intimidation and bribes. Every file, every recorded conversation, and every subtle gesture in court was painstakingly examined. Months passed as he built a network of trusted associates who too despised the decay in their institutions. The task was overwhelming, yet his determination was unwavering. Marcus knew that to achieve his goal, he would have to risk everything, even his reputation, his freedom, and perhaps even his life. Marcus's plan involved a role reversal of extraordinary proportions. He would pose as a defendant in a seemingly minor case, thereby infiltrating the very world he had long condemned. With the help of a small team of hand-picked allies, fellow jurists, an intrepid journalist, an anonymous informant embedded in the city's police department, Marcus engineered circumstances that would cast him as a criminal. The plan was both delicate and intricate. By injecting himself into the judicial circle as a repeat offender, he would gain unfiltered access to the hidden corridors of injustice. The idea was audacious and the risks stacked high, but his conviction was absolute. So, under the guise of guilt and subterfuge, Marcus entered a phase of investigation that would come to reshape the destiny of the judicial system. In the calm, meticulously furnished interrogation room of a low-security district courthouse, Marcus was paraded before a bleak audience. His eyes, once calm and judicious as he had delivered verdicts, now burned with a secret intensity. He had carefully choreographed each movement to appear as if he were merely another desperate man on the run from his past, no longer one of the system's protectors. His fellow courtroom denizens, oblivious to his true identity, offered him pointed stares and disdainful sneers. Branded as a habitual criminal, he had become an enigma, a man whose daring escapades and precipitous fall from grace made him the subject of whispered rumors in every backstreet bar and upscale diner alike. Yet behind his disheveled appearance lay a stratagem that would soon expose the league of villains operating in the shadows. In every conversation and every haggling over the guilty plea, Marcus gathered evidence, piecing together coded references and veiled threats. The courthouse, with its stale air and oppressive stillness, became the stage for revelations that would dismantle a system steeped in collusion and treachery. Behind the scenes, Marcus's trusted aide Elena maintained constant contact through secret channels arranged in the dead of night. Elena, a former prosecutor known for her unyielding drive for reform, had always been on the periphery of Marcus's long career. Together, they had battled the darkness of corruption and seen firsthand how the rot extended even to those meant to shield society from injustice. Elena's skill in data analysis provided the backbone to Marcus's bold undercover work. With access to secure documents and confidential communications, she meticulously pieced together the network of bribes, payoffs, and intimidation tactics orchestrated by influential figures. Their coordination was seamless yet risky, as every coded message was a potential line on a map that could lead directly to Marcus's double life. Time and again, Elena's timely tips and discreet arrangements ensured that Marcus remained one step ahead of those who might expose his true identity, making his transformation from judge to criminal a masterpiece of secret subterfuge. As weeks turned to months, Marcus encountered many dangerous encounters. In one early case, he was forced to attend a clandestine meeting at a shabby motel on a rainy night. Shadows danced across the walls as figures cloaked in anonymity discussed the intricacies of evading detection and silencing whistleblowers. Marcus, ever the careful observer, absorbed every detail. It was there he learned of a front company discreetly financing the bribes that kept corrupt officials in power. The meeting, conducted in hushed tones and half-truths, laid bare the cold mechanics of a system whose only loyalty was to its own self-interest. Every memo exchanged, every whispered conversation, became a piece of tangible proof that Marcus would later collate into an indisputable dossier. This dossier, a carefully constructed portfolio of damning evidence, grew to encompass records of undisclosed bank transfers, meeting logs with suspicious figures, and transcripts of conversations laced with the language of conspiracy. Marcus knew that once the dossier was ready, a single, public moment would have the power to fracture the unholy alliance that had brainwashed the system for so long. The tension in the underworld of the city was palpable. Rumors of an insider among the corrupt began to ripple through the network of criminals. For every whispered conversation in darkened alleys, Marcus sensed the stirrings of a conspiracy that was now aware of its enemy in their midst. Outside the courthouse, political allies and powerful lobbyists grew anxious at the thought that a long-hidden exposé was coming to light. In their eyes, the facade of legality was the very foundation of their power, power that was now under siege by an entity that defied categorization. Their desperation led to unforeseen acts of brutality. Witnesses were intimidated, and private security was deployed in a newfound attempt to reclaim control. Marcus, despite his own personal risks, cleverly navigated this labyrinth of terror and mistrust. Every piece of evidence he collected was a counterstrike against the plutocrats and their henchmen. His encounters were fraught with danger, shadowed by silenced threats and vague promises of retribution, but his resolve only grew stronger with each step, each misstep that brought him closer to the dark epicenter of corruption. A turning point came when Marcus found himself in a high-stakes courtroom drama that had the eyes of both the public and the underworld fixated on him. Hired by an unrepentant criminal syndicate to defend another notorious repeat offender, Marcus was thrust into a trial that was more spectacle than justice. The proceedings took place in an overcrowded court where whispers merged with the clanging of metal chairs and nervous glances among the audience. As the proceedings unfolded, the prosecution began to build a case that was meticulously rehearsed and alarmingly sophisticated. It was then that Marcus, in a moment of unscripted brilliance, began to lay subtle hints of truths too dangerous for open discussion. He referenced inconspicuous details, a slight change in the testimonies, a pause in the prosecutor's narrative, the unusual behavior of a key witness, that gradually coalesced into a silent accusation against unseen entities. Nothing was said aloud, yet his eyes and subtle gestures conveyed a message loud enough to shake those present. It was the first time he openly defied the narrative of the corrupt, suggesting that the very system that was built to uphold the rule of law was itself compromised by forces willing to gamble with human lives for their own enrichment. Outside the courthouse, the city bubbled with whispers of what was to come. Rumors of a dramatic unveiling of corruption set the streets abuzz with fear, anticipation, and a fervent desire for a reckoning. The same criminal syndicate that had once operated with impunity now found their carefully constructed empire under threat. Behind closed doors, meetings were held in panic, and criminal masterminds scrambled to erase any traces that might divulge their positions. Marcus's dossier, which was now brimming with the incontrovertible proof of systemic collusion, lay hidden in a safe house under constant surveillance. As the days crept by, a sense of impending inevitability permeated the air. A storm of retribution was brewing that would soon leave no stone unturned and no corrupt official unaccountable. In an audacious move engineered through weeks of clandestine planning, Marcus arranged a final encounter, a meeting with the most powerful criminal financier of the network. This individual, known as Victor Demir, had long been a ghost in the system, a man whose political connections and economic influence ensured him a free hand in the machinations of corruption. The meeting was scheduled to take place in an abandoned industrial complex on the city's outskirts. The location itself was a character in this narrative, a decaying monument to a bygone era now repurposed as a hub for illicit transactions, covered in graffiti and stained with the remnants of secrets past. Marcus, with his eyes never betraying the depth of his mission, walked into the darkness alone, accompanied only by his unyielding determination and the silent promise of retribution. Victor Demir, flanked by a small entourage of armed enforcers, exuded a dangerous confidence. The air was thick with tension as the two adversaries, each an embodiment of their respective worlds, assessed each other in silence. Victor's voice, smooth yet edged with threat, cut through the stillness as he questioned, "Who are you, and why have you come here? You're not one of my usual clientele." Marcus replied calmly, his voice betraying no hint of the secrets he carried. "I am merely a man seeking justice, a man wronged by those who hide behind free passes and false faces." The words, uttered in measured syllables, resonated with an unforeseen weight. Victor's eyes narrowed, and a cold smile played on his lips as he replied, "Justice. In a world governed by power, justice is a currency none can truly possess." It was then that the atmosphere shifted from wary dialogue to an electric confrontation between the old guard of corruption and the relentless force of truth. What transpired in that dilapidated warehouse was not a typical negotiation but a war of wits, a battle where every word carried the promise of retribution. The dialogue meandered as Victor tried to bargain for his freedom with promises of influence and wealth, while Marcus steadily countered with evidence and the unwavering conviction that the public deserved to know the truth. Every threat, every rebuke in that dusty arena escalated the stakes to new heights. Unbeknownst to Victor, every uttered word was being recorded and transmitted through encrypted channels to Elena and their trusted allies, who were preparing for the inevitable spiral of events that would soon follow. When Marcus returned to the courtroom after the meeting, his demeanor had transformed. No longer was he the man who feigned guilt for the sake of the investigation. He now embodied the righteous fury of a force determined to cleanse the system. With the mounting weight of documented proofs and testimonies that pinpointed the corruption, he arranged for an unexpected and highly publicized confrontation. The trial that followed became a battleground where every participant was forced to confront the grotesque reality of the system's rot. In a series of explosive sessions that spanned weeks, Marcus methodically brought to light damning evidence that connected high-ranking officials, prominent financiers, and even bureaucrats within the legal framework itself. Witnesses, once coerced into silence, now took the stand with quivering voices as they recounted harrowing tales of intimidation and betrayal. The courtroom was transformed into an arena where the idealism of justice clashed with the entrenched interests of power. Every revelation was a hammer blow against a structure built on deceit. It was as if the courtroom became a crucible where the old order was being melted down and purified by the flames of truth. In these tumultuous days, public opinion swung like a pendulum. Citizens, already weary of the endless cycles of unpunished crimes and restless injustice, began to rally behind Marcus. His undercover mission had inadvertently sparked a movement, a populist uprising against the entrenched elite who had long evaded accountability. In the seedy backrooms of pubs and on the digital forums that connected citizens, the figure of Judge Marcus, the fallen hero now turned avenger, began to take on mythic proportions. People spoke of him not as a judge but as a vanguard, a solitary individual who had dared to stand up to a system built on lies. The transformative energy was palpable. In every protest, every rally, and every conversation at the water cooler in government offices, the hope for a system free of corruption was nurtured by the promise of reform. Meanwhile, the protectors of the old order scrambled to salvage what remained of their clandestine empires. They mobbed around their boardrooms and whispered defenses in smoky back alleys, but the tide of truth was unstoppable. All the while, Marcus was engaged in his most perilous challenge yet, maintaining the delicate balance between his undercover persona and the reality of his true identity. Each day in court was an elaborate dance where one misstep could lead to his unmasking. The stakes were higher than ever as his cellular phone buzzed with coded warnings, and anonymous emails threatened exposure. Yet, every threat was met with a calm resolve. The system he had loved all his adult life was being hijacked by an unstoppable darkness, but Marcus had found a light, a beacon of hope that resided in every courageous person willing to stand against tyranny. His secret communications with Elena now became more frequent, as he updated her on every subtle clue and every newfound lead. In their private calls, they discussed not only the logistics but also the ethical implications of their actions. There were moments of doubt, those haunted hours in the silence of the night when Marcus questioned whether his gamble might finally bring ruin to everything he had once believed in. But the memory of every injustice and every tear shed by the victims of the corruption fueled his determination to move forward. As the evidence mounted and the tendrils of corruption were laid bare for all to see, a turning point was reached. In an unprecedented move, a closed-door meeting was arranged between Marcus and the highest echelons of the government. Under heavy security and with every facet of the law bending under the pressure of guilt, a select group of reformist officials decided that the damage inflicted on the state was too high to ignore. They were willing, at great personal risk, to acknowledge the rot and to initiate a procedure for radical reform. Hidden away in a quiet government warehouse, dignitaries and representatives of the Justice Department convened for an emergency session with Marcus at its center. There, in a room marked by both opulence and whispering shadows, Marcus presented his compendium of evidence. Each document, each recorded conversation, and each sworn testimony formed an irrefutable mosaic of guilt that spanned decades. The weight of the evidence was such that even those who had benefited from the injustice could not deny the truth without tarnishing their legacies irreversibly. For every official present, there was an internal battle, a moment of reckoning between loyalty to a tainted system and the desire to return to a time when justice meant fairness, not cronyism. In that meeting, the voices of a select few resonated with conviction to sanction a radical purge, to remove from power those who had sabotaged the very notion of the law, and to usher in an unprecedented era of transparency and accountability. Yet, even as the wheels of reform creaked into motion, the corrupt network was not willing to succumb without a fight. In the dark recesses of the same city that had witnessed decades of quiet subterfuge, an all-out counteroffensive was launched. Victor Demir, now exposed as merely one cog in a vast ramshackle machine of conspiracy, mobilized his remaining loyalists. In a series of coordinated strikes, those entrusted with upholding the deception resorted to desperate measures. Lawyers were threatened, investigative reporters found themselves shadowed by unidentified figures, and witnesses who had testified against the regime began receiving ominous messages. The underworld was ablaze with a frenzied energy that was equal parts terror and determination. For the corrupt, it was a fight for survival, a last-ditch attempt to preserve their status by silencing the advocate of truth. Yet, every dark message, every private threat was met with an even darker resolve from Marcus and his team. Each act of intimidation fueled their commitment to the cause. The barricades of silence that had long protected the powerful began to crumble, as more and more individuals within the system chose to test their loyalties by coming forward with their own accounts of malfeasance. In the midst of this turmoil, Marcus found solace in unexpected moments of humanity. There were nights when, after exhausting hours in the courtroom or shrouded meetings with shadowy figures, he would find himself standing on an overpass, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars over a turbulent sea of humanity. In those moments, the immense burden of his double life, the relentless pressure of being both a judge and a man among criminals, lifted for just a heartbeat, and he allowed himself to dream of a future purified by justice. One such night was especially poignant. The rain pounded the pavement, washing away layers of grime and long-held secrets, and as he gazed into the wet darkness, he recalled a memory of his early days in the judiciary, when every verdict he pronounced was a promise to protect the downtrodden. Those memories became his anchor. They reminded him that every sacrifice, every sleepless night, was all in service of a higher purpose, a purpose that transcended personal gain or professional accolades. It was the cause of every citizen who had ever felt the sting of betrayal at the hands of a corrupt establishment, and the hope that one day justice would not be a mirage reserved for the privileged few. Then, in an explosive climax that seemed to merge every fraught thread of his undercover odyssey, Marcus orchestrated a televised session in the very courtroom where he had once stood as a condemned criminal. The broadcast was promised to be a routine session, but it quickly escalated into an unprecedented spectacle. All the cameras in the country were trained on this courtroom as Marcus, from the bench he once called home, commenced a dramatic recapitulation of his investigation. His voice, steady and fierce, narrated the saga of corruption in detail, methodically mapping every twist and turn. The courtroom was electrified as he displayed charts of bank transactions, audio recordings of whispered threats, and testimonies from the brave souls who had risked everything for the sake of truth. The sight of a judge, once cloaked in the respect of his office, standing there in that dual role of confessor and redeemer, resonated deeply with the public. Across the nation, millions found themselves gripped by the reality that the foundations of the system were marred by deceit. The chamber fell silent as each revelation echoed with the force of accountability. In that grand moment of unvarnished truth, the corrupt could no longer hide behind their shields of power and money. The broadcast was not merely an airing of evidence, it was the thunderous, clarion call for a complete overhaul of the regulations, an unequivocal demand that no one was above the law. In the fallout that followed, the country was forever altered. A cascade of resignations ensued as the implicated individuals, unable to reconcile with the overwhelming tide of exposure, turned away from the public eye. Protests erupted in cities, peaceful yet impassioned demonstrations that marched in unison with the cry for a fair and transparent system. New leaders emerged from unexpected quarters, people who had not shied away from confronting the dark underbelly of power. The Judicial Reform Initiative, which had seemed a distant dream, was transformed into law by a coalition of reformists and ordinary citizens who had become fed up with the status quo. For Marcus, the journey that began as a dangerous gamble had culminated in the rebirth of a system once thought irredeemable. Even as his true identity was gradually unveiled to the public, he preferred to remain shrouded in a veil of mystery, a symbol of the idea that justice transcends personal recognition, that it is the collective endeavor of a society determined to right gravely wrongs in its midst. In the days of reconstruction that followed, Marcus withdrew from the limelight. He retreated to the quiet solitude of a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city, where he could reflect on the harrowing odyssey that had transformed him from an esteemed judge to an undercover crusader. Elena continued to work diligently, ensuring that the reforms were implemented with precision and fairness. The changes were not without hiccups, for removing corruption, especially one so deeply entrenched, was a process fraught with challenges, but there was an air of optimism that had been long absent from the halls of power. Every reform was an incremental victory, every removed network a testament to the resilience of those who believed in the potency of truth. The journey to cleanse the very soul of the justice system was arduous and unending. Each day opened with the promise of progress and ended with the echoes of past sacrifices. But for the citizens, it was a dawn of hope after years of darkness, a future where their voices, once muffled by sinister forces, could finally resonate in the corridors of power. As the narrative of this uprising began to spread beyond the confines of the city, even distant communities started to embrace the principles that Marcus fought for. In classrooms, community centers, and public forums, the importance of accountability and transparency was extolled as the backbone of a society that could rise above its flawed past. Teachers recounted the story of the undercover judge not as a mere anecdote, but as a modern parable, a lesson in the power of conviction and the courage to stand against overwhelming odds. The metamorphosis was not instantaneous, but it signaled the birth of a collective movement where every voice mattered. The corrupt hierarchy, though battered and bruised, remained a cautionary tale for future generations. Every time a new case was heard, every time a verdict was delivered, there was an unspoken promise that no one, regardless of status, would be allowed to manipulate the scales of justice without consequence. In the lingering aftermath of the telephone press conferences, televised court sessions, and impassioned debates, Marcus had one final act of quiet benevolence. He initiated a mentorship program for aspiring jurists from marginalized communities. His aim was to foster an environment where future judges would be not only versed in the intricacies of law, but also in the importance of moral courage, empathy, and the relentless pursuit of truth. In a modest ceremony held in a renovated courthouse, Marcus stood before a crowd of hopeful faces. His voice, now softened by years of personal sacrifice yet resolutely articulate, promised that the law was more than statutes and regulations. It was a living, breathing force that needed to be nurtured by a commitment to fairness, humility, and responsibility. To those gathered, he said, "Today, we sow the seeds of a justice that will blossom in the hearts of every citizen. Let this be a constant reminder that while darkness may seek refuge in the corridors of power, it will always be challenged by the light of truth." And as those words echoed within the halls, the apprenticeship of the new custodians of law began, one that would forever bear the legacy of a judge who once risked everything to set right what had long been awry. Months turned into years, and the reform program continued to inspire not only legal circles but also everyday people. Statutes were revised, and the new measure of accountability became the bedrock of governance. Even those who had once found shelter within the shadows of corrupt power came to understand that the implications of reform were irreversible. The public trust, once fractured and fragmented, slowly coalesced into a formidable force for progress. In subsequent trials and legal proceedings, the evidence and testimonies compiled during Marcus's undercover mission were scrutinized and celebrated as monumental achievements, a turning point in a history too long marred by collusion. It was not uncommon to hear a young law student whisper with awe about the undercover judge, a symbol of hope and the undying spirit of accountability that had redefined the judiciary. The myth that had taken root in the collective memory of the citizens grew into a powerful narrative for social transformation, an enduring reminder that one man's courage could indeed spark a nationwide crusade against injustice. As the years progressed, Marcus Halden's own legacy transformed into a layered mosaic of triumph and sacrifice. In quiet moments of reflection, he certainly acknowledged that his journey had come at a personal cost. The life he once led, a life of dignity, respect, and purpose, had been sacrificed on the altar of an ideal he could not compromise. He had become both a celebrated hero and a target of vilification. Yet, amid the accolades and the scorn, his conscience remained clear. Marcus often walked the city streets at twilight, blending into the crowd as a silent observer of a society that had begun to heal. Every time he encountered a young adult studying law in a park or listened to a fervent discussion about future reforms, a profound sense of satisfaction filled him. He had not only exposed corruption, but in doing so, he had ignited a light that would not be extinguished by fear or intimidation. In the final, reflective pages of this long struggle, Marcus's thoughts turned to the future. The story of his undercover mission was not one of a single act of bravery, but a reminder of the continuous effort required to preserve the delicate balance between authority and accountability. With every step forward, new challenges emerged, challenges that demanded further vigilance and a commitment that spanned generations. Marcus wrote letters to the future custodians of justice, documents that chronicled his journey and the lessons learned along the way. These letters, stored in the archives of a reformed judiciary, were intended not solely as a memoir of a man who had risked everything, but as a guide for those who would walk the complex path of enforcement with compassion and intensity. In one poignant passage he wrote, "May you always remember that justice is not a static ideal but a never-ending journey, a quest that calls for continuous introspection, relentless courage, and the willingness to defy the darkness that festers even in the highest offices." His words became a beacon for those navigating the challenges of an ever-changing world, a reminder that even in the twilight of self-doubt, the light of truth shines unyielding. And so, as the judicial system evolved and society began to build a future immune to the affinity for corruption that had long plagued its past, the legacy of the undercover judge resonated far beyond the walls of courtrooms and government offices. His audacious act of posing as a defendant had unmasked a deep-seated rot, revealing that the strength of the law lay not in the power it wielded over the masses, but in the accountability it demanded from those who governed it. With every reformed statute, every testimony delivered with sincerity, and every trial conducted with an abiding sense of fairness, the citizens paid homage to the sacrifices made by a man who had walked the line between righteousness and rebellion. Their collective future was now brighter and more secure, a future where the scales of justice, though at times precarious, were forever balanced by the determination of its custodians. And while Marcus Halden eventually receded into the annals of history, his story lived on as a timeless testament to the unyielding spirit of truth, a reminder that even when the system appears overwhelmingly flawed, one courageous act can redefine the fate of an entire society. In the end, the story of the undercover judge became interwoven with the very fabric of a nation reborn. It was a narrative in which every participant, from whistleblowers and ordinary citizens to transformed officials and brave reformists, played a part in reshaping a world that had long struggled under the weight of its own corruption. The tale was recounted in courtrooms, classrooms, and living rooms across the country, not merely as history, but as an ongoing call to vigilance. For justice is not a static award bestowed upon the worthy, but a perennial struggle that demands persistence, sacrifice, and an unwavering belief in the truth. And as the echoes of Marcus Halden's footsteps mingled with the aspirations of a revitalized society, it was established as an enduring truth that even amidst the pervasive darkness of corruption, one man's defiant stand could remake the destiny of an entire nation. The legacy of that fateful endeavor was not measured solely by the downfall of a corrupt regime, but by the renewal of faith in the principles that underpin every equitable society: truth, fairness, and the indomitable strength of the human spirit. In every courtroom where integrity was upheld, and every citizen who dared to speak out, the spirit of the undercover judge remained. And so, as the sun set on a world forever changed, the message was clear. Justice might be delayed, and corruption might cast its long shadow, but the light of truth, nurtured by the bravery of those who dare to defy injustice, shall never be extinguished. Each passing day, every new challenge, was a continuation of the journey that began in a rainy night in a city of secrets. And in every heart that beat with hope and in every mind that contemplated a better world, the legend of Marcus Halden, the undercover judge, lived on, urging each generation to rise against tyranny, to demand transparency from those sworn to protect them, and to forever remember that justice, once tainted, must be fought for with every ounce of resolve until it is restored for all. His story, carved into the annals of time, remains an invitation to question, to rebel, and ultimately, to engage in the timeless struggle for honesty and truth, a struggle that, until the day injustice vanishes, belongs to all of us. And so, this epic journey, spun from the threads of deceit and courage, concludes yet leaves an indelible mark on the collective soul of our society. The legacy of Marcus Halden is not confined to the realms of courtroom drama or the annals of political intrigue, but it blossoms in the everyday hope of a community that dared to dream of a better tomorrow. In the echoes of his sacrifices and in the reforms that followed, one truth stands eternal. It takes only one brave soul to light the beacon of justice, and that single spark can set the world afire with the passion for truth, fairness, and the unyielding hope that even amid the shadows of corruption, justice will prevail.